Okay, hello. Hello, everyone. Looks like we're live. Welcome back to Mission Top, and welcome to this live stream. Mission Top is a farmstead and ranch. It is a family, but it's also a place for cultivating philosophia. And today, we're going to try to cultivate some of that philosophia, this love of wisdom, especially as men, by trying to decode chick flicks. As fun as that sounds. Some of you are already here, so at least some people see some possibility in it. Hello, Christian and Loran and Chase and anybody else that's on here. I thought I would start off today, have a little bit of a story from the farmstead perspective, have a little bear story from late last night. So I was about to get into, we're just getting ready for bed, I guess you could say, and I have this bathroom window that was slightly cracked. It was about 11:30, and from outside of there in our room, suddenly both Sarah and I heard this animal sound that was definitely in distress. Like, did you hear that? Yeah, I heard that. And so it's, of course, pitch dark. It's also raining, like a pretty torrential rain. There's been some great rains here, which we've really needed. And so the animal sound kept on, repeating, and enough that it's different than the usual animal sounds that we're hearing. And so we couldn't just let this go on, had to investigate, of course, right? So I get my shoes on, get a rain jacket, get a big flashlight that I have, and head out. And our house is kind of surrounded by foresty part. It was off in the direction of my neighbors. Again, pouring rain, and Sarah didn't really want to come out, and everybody else was asleep. So I headed off with a little can of bear spray and my big flashlight kind of thing, and headed off towards the sound. Got to my neighbor's fence, where I peered over and I could hear the sound but couldn't quite see anything yet, so went a little bit farther down the fence line into a kind of a more foresty area along the fence line. I'm shining and I could see some eyes, as you can see, animal eyes flashed by a flashlight. I could see some sort of movement and couldn't quite tell what kind of animal it was that was in distress. My guess was a goat. That's a little bit what it sounded like, but again, a goat in pain, right? And so I could see something moving a little bit, and so I had to kind of stop there and be like, all right, a goat seems to be in pain. Maybe it's in labor. It is kind of kidding and lambing season around here. Maybe it's a deer. On the way over, I saw some deer. Maybe it's a deer that's giving birth or something like that. Maybe it's an animal that's just caught. But of course, maybe it's an animal that's being eaten by a bear, and I couldn't quite see. It was too dark. The way the flashlight would interact with the big droplets of rain coming down. So finally I decided, well, I can at least jump over this fence, get a little bit closer, and check it out. So I did that. I kind of jumped over this fence. I was wondering if my neighbors would want me doing that or not, but I decided to just go for it because I didn't see any activity from their house a little bit away. Jumped over the fence, made it about 10 feet, and now I'm about 30 yards, I guess you could say, from where I thought this animal was. And boom, there, in addition to the animal that I was seeing on the ground, I see what, I'm now 95%, well, now I'm 100% sure was the outline of a bear right by it. And so I'm like, oh, crap. I jump over, just that rush of fear comes over you, jump back over the fence, kind of shine, see if anything's happening to follow me, and then kind of very quickly hustle retreat because I wasn't going to mess with a bear being eaten by a kill. So anyway, we call our neighbor, eventually got a hold of them and went over to investigate with a car. And indeed, we did find a goat that had some, puncture wounds in it, and had to get this goat into a truck, get the truck into a barn, and helped our neighbor. So it was our neighbor's goat. It appears a bear did attack it. And then after this morning, so we come back and finally got to sleep like 1 a.m. because you're just kind of charged up and stuff. But this morning we went and checked our trail cams, which we have situated a little bit around the property, and sure enough, there was a bear on the trail cams right about when I had been over there. So what we think might have happened is when I went and, got scared by the bear, I think the bear also got scared by me and left at that point, which this goat might even make it. It wasn't like, gruesome wounds, just some puncture kind of wounds and maybe a hurt leg or something like that. So the goat will probably make it. But anyway, close calls with bears here. Actually, about a week ago on a different trail cam, we'd also caught a bear that looked more like a grizzly. So that's just the reality of living here. And we've tried to put up with with everything we've got going, the best defenses we can in terms of electric fence, and now our livestock guardian dogs, which we're really excited about, which really seem to work well to keep the bears away. But just thought I would share that with you to give you the sense that even though we talk about the philosophia part, we're very much embedded in the farmstead and ranch part going on as well in this region that I quite love, because it's this combination of men and men and also women, of course, people, let's say, and agriculture, but right at the border of wilderness, that has all the last of our worst monsters in it, I guess you could say, of grizzly bears being those which very much come and encroach in on this border space and into your life. And I think the best way to handle it is not to try to destroy monsters or things, but respect monsters. Respect the place that they can have and learn to live with them by respecting them. That's kind of a thing. And as much as we talk so much about symbolism and patterns, that's very much something you can bring into your own life, is to realize that monsters are there inside of all of us, right? Whether you want to call them your passions or demons out there in the world or whatnot. And I think the best thing to do is to put up the proper defenses around them, but not look to wage a war with them, as it were. And that's not what we want to do with the bears around here, but rather keep them out of where we don't want them to be, but also respect them and allow them to be on their way and about their business, in as much as monsters, demons, bears, all those things are part of the world and should be respected. So anyway, story to start things out, totally not related to our topic today, but interesting nonetheless, at least for me, and quite exciting as of last night. Also, in this last week, I was successful at harvesting our first lamb. It was a sobering experience to slit the throat of a lamb that you've just subdued, that goes completely passive, and is just, they very quickly, they realize you have complete control over them, and they, like you kind of hear about sheep, are utterly submissive at that moment. It's very humbling. And anyway, went through the whole skinning and then butchering process, and we've been tasting our first lamb that has been born and raised completely here on Mission Top. And we're going to do another one tomorrow with a youth group that's going to come over, and we're going to go through that whole process again. So good updates, I guess, on that way. A lot of progress being made here on the farmstead. And we have a lot of male lambs that, are left to be part of our, future meat supply here left to go. So, and a lot to learn. I very much enjoyed, once you get this lamb with the skin off and the head off and things like that, it's just a carcass, at that point, right? And it's very different from the lambs that you know. And then it becomes a skill to honor that lamb, in a sense, in the greatest way, by making full use of everything that it had to offer, to give to you. And so I'm very much enjoying that process of learning the skill of butchery, and then how to take that, ultimately the whole telos, the final purpose of what you're doing, lies in the kitchen and in the pots and pans, and how to make best use, so that again, there's a very real sense that the best way that you can honor these animals that you do raise for their meat, in this symbiotic relationship where you in many ways give them and their family, their flock, a good symbiotic living, while again taking from the flock as well. It's a covenant relationship, if you want to call it that. But the best way you can honor the unfortunate part, which is the extinguishing of life in it, is to make full use and turn what this lamb gave into the most beautiful end result, which would be something, culinary in the end, that is beautiful. And there's something, you can go a little bit morbid turn with that, but I hope you also see the beauty and how you're most honoring an animal by using it in the greatest ways and turning it into the most beautiful form it can be at that point. So anyway, all that to just give updates of what's going on here before we dive into this topic today of decoding chick flicks, which this kind of way of approaching chick flicks, guys like to make fun of chick flicks and they'd never watch them and things like that. Well, sometime in high school, I started to clue into the fact, with the way that girls would talk about chick flicks, and probably especially getting to know my wife, which I met in high school. and understanding women, something clicked in my mind that said, hey, if women are paying such great attention and they seem to care about this and talk about it so much, well, if you want to understand them and why they're paying attention to things like this, to chick flicks, and what's so captivating to them about them, well, maybe if you want to pay attention to that and figure that out from that perspective, why women pay attention to certain movies, to chick flicks. You might be able to pull something out to kind of understand the condition of women and how maybe something could be turned to make them pay attention to you in as much as you embody some of the patterns that are in these stories which they're watching. So that's very much in the spirit of why I think it's worthwhile to do this. It's to understand women in as much as this is something that's important to them. And so that's the angle from which we're going to approach this very quintessential of all chick flicks, Pride and Prejudice, which in its many, many forms just hasn't faded away yet from our collective conscious, which suggests that it has some very stable universal human archetypes or patterns going on within it that are ones that you can extract and apply to your own life. So that's why we're starting with this. And I hope to make this an ongoing series. As with all these live streams, I hope to take what we begin here in our discussion and then ultimately turn it into a video essay, which will be much more entertaining, per se. Oftentimes less is forms of the ideas and content, but more entertaining and polished in the end. But for those of you that love the just the ideas in and of themselves and the ability to participate, because I welcome that, please do comment, ask questions, interact with each other in the chat. This is the greater space to do that. Okay, one more caveat on this is, of course, in diving into Pride and Prejudice, am I pretending that my interpretation of this story is exhaustive or that I've got it right? No, of course not. That's what makes for such great timely or timeless stories, rather, is that they hold out the possibility of so many different interpretations to them. So I'm not at all saying this is the right or the only interpretation you can give this film. It's just the one that seems most relevant to me for this purpose and at this time in my life. And especially as to my conclusions as to women, am I trying to say that this applies to every woman everywhere and that every woman is going to agree with me on this? No, of course not. Although I have run them by women, particularly my wife and others in conversation over time, and in general, they seem to pass muster. So anyway, those are my caveats before we dive into this story of Pride and Prejudice and what it has to teach us about women. Martin and Jorge Gomez, also hello. Thanks for participating there on the chat. And yeah, look forward to all of your questions and comments by the time we get to the end of this. So Pride and Prejudice, I'm hoping that many of you have seen this. It's been, again, there's so many forms of it, whether it's Pride and Prejudice and zombies, or there's kind of a Bollywood or an Indian Pride and Prejudice. There's of course multiple versions just in the basic story itself. There's so many versions. I'm hoping that you've caught at least one of them, but for those that may have not, I'll try to give a brief synopsis. I feel like I've gone too long in the past, so I'll try to be very brief with what this story is essentially about. The story is essentially about a family with 5 sisters, right? And each of these sisters is a fairly different female personality. Now, that's why I think it makes for a good story to understand women. You've got, I believe the eldest sister is named Jane, and she's known as kind of the most beautiful girl in the community, but also kind of very subdued and shy. She's got a sister, Elizabeth, who's more the protagonist of the story, also known as being beautiful, but maybe not so quite as striking as Jane, but maybe with more kind of substance to her character, known as being smart, witty, but also has some bite to her, right? She's got some fire inside of her that comes out at times. And then there's the 3 other sisters who are kind of minor characters in the story, but also important. You've got Kitty, who is a sister who's kind of more flirtatious and a little bit of a floozy, but a little more of a subdued one. And then you've got her sister Lydia, who is also flirtatious and a floozy, but a more outgoing one. And then you've got this sister Mary, who's kind of the awkward sister, maybe has, some intellectual things going on there, pursues the arts or different these things, but struggles to kind of be the most socially adept of the sisters. So you have these different female personalities there in this family. And then as a whole, it's a very funny family because they've also got these parents, kind of an odd father that's a little bit of a, he's out there in the community, but he's also not just one of the big men of the community per se. And they've got this mother who's kind of, as she's described, kind of utterly ridiculous, who her sole purpose in life is to see her 5 daughters, married off to well-to-do men, and kind of makes a fool of herself in many instances by having that be the sole kind of purpose of her life. So that's the context, is this family. And the story really gets going when 2 very well-to-do gentlemen move to the area, and the family, particularly the elder girls, take a fascination with them. So these 2 gentlemen are Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy, and they're both very wealthy. Bingley being the one that's kind of bought a summer estate, and Darcy, his friend, who's even more wealthy than Mr. Bingley. And Jane takes a liking to Bingley, who is kind and a good man, I guess you could say, but also kind of goofy, and he takes a liking to her. While everyone else initially turned off by kind of the coldness and pride and condescension of Mr. Darcy, the more richer one, who at a dance seems kind of pompous and removed, and a little bit having that air of being better than this kind of community. But they're intrigued by him nonetheless because he has a much bigger annual income from his estate than even Mr. Bingley. I forgot, I'm going to put up the next visual here that kind of puts some of these characters, kind of gives you some of the different classic versions of them here. So you can see the 5 sisters in the most kind of recent version of the classic film. You've got Bingley and Darcy there in a few places, and Darcy and Elizabeth in another one. So you can enjoy those during the rest of the synopsis. Okay, so the movie then, once these 2 wealthy gentlemen are in the area, the movie centers on the developing relationship between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, who again initially show kind of a coldness to each other, but the movie develops a growing relationship between them, all the while there's a tension in this relationship between Jane and Bingley, because certain people think that Jane is not good enough for him. And then at the same time, the story becomes quite fun when there's some other suitors that come in pursuing Elizabeth, such as a dashing soldier, Mr. Wickham, and this family relation priest, Mr. Collins, who is this utterly kind of goofy, arrogant, just kind of clueless guy who's full into himself, and very much makes for a fun part of the story when he's out there pursuing Elizabeth. So that's the essence of the story, and I'm not going to go through all the way that it finishes and whatnot, because I'll preserve that for you that haven't exactly seen it. But we'll go more into now what we can pull out of the story, why it's important, why I think people keep coming back to this story, and why I do. I've seen it now so many times, because between having sisters in my house that would play the old one, and my mom, and then the new one came out, and we have it, and it's one of Sarah's favorite movies, so we've seen it periodically through the years. And then I haven't yet read the book. I want to. I should. But then seeing these different versions, kind of catching glimpses of the other ones, this has just been an ongoing story through my mind, which is funny because again, as a man, it's like, it's kind of interesting, but it's not exactly the most alluring thing. But nonetheless, I have it in my mind anyway because I've seen it, and that's where it's at least good to make use of. So let's pull out the principles that we can learn about women that can help at a practical level, those of us who want to understand women, and especially those of us who have yet to perhaps, gain or win the heart, I guess you could say, of a spouse or whatnot, and are looking for that process, whether a girlfriend or a permanent or a permanent spouse or whatnot, to kind of gain some principles that are useful to know from that. So number one, and this is what the movie so much centers on, is that women are predominantly interested in higher status men. And the first time I heard this, probably the person that articulates it the best is Jordan Peterson, right? The first time I heard this, it just makes so much, the rest of life makes so much sense in so many ways. Your high school years probably make so much sense, because it turns out this is largely true. No matter what the modern kind of ideas and things have crept into our society, this idea still holds predominantly true, that women are mostly interested or predominantly interested in higher status men. And this story is all about that, because the whole idea for these 5 sisters in finding spouses is that they find somebody at least at their social status or higher. And that tends to be how it works out in humanity, right? So you come back to high school, right? And again, once you kind of realize this makes so much sense, because I was a person very much kind of middle class type person. If anything, yeah, very much, I guess, middle class. I was going to say maybe lower middle class, but not really. Middle class, maybe later in life was more upper middle class, but very much there. Whereas my high school had a lot of more upper class, kind of new wealth American type people who have gained their fortunes usually within one generation or at the most 2 generations higher, who in our community kind of hold a higher status. It is just kind of is the fact that in most American communities, and especially in the American West and whatnot, those who have more money tend to have more status. And so, I've struggled to understand as a high schooler why certain girls just seem to not even give me the time of day, right? Whereas other girls would. And then there were certain fools of guys, right? Just, utterly, guys that were an embarrassment, right? And nonetheless, you would see girls go and be attracted to them, right? And I didn't have the wherewithal, the social wherewithal to realize that this was completely a function of status. These girls that, kind of people learn about each other. We know what families are and who's who in the community and whatnot in any given high school or whatnot. And so these girls knew that they're the ones that lived higher up on the hill, if you were, and their houses were bigger. And somebody like me, which lived kind of in a row townhouse at the time, it didn't work. There's no interest there for predominantly, because that's just not how society works. Whereas some, fool of a guy, because his family might have some status, he has a name, he has that has some cachet in the community. Well, there's already an interest there, and maybe you have seen, you can share with me if you've had some of the same experiences. But the good news is that wherever you are, for a guy, no matter where your social status is and that of your family, that there is no there is no discrimination on a gene level as far as kind of the beauty of women and as far as the quality of their characters. So at your social level or lower, there are bound to be many great women and beautiful women and women who have great characters and minds and all the great attributes that men either do or should care about. And so, so there's plenty of perspective. I don't know what the right word is, whether it's girlfriends or things like that in high school. And so things went fine, but there was always that mystery of why there were certain ones that, they were attractive enough in all the ways of attractiveness, but just wouldn't give you the time of day. And this explanation gives that so much. So this does tend to hold. And this story shows it obviously with these 2 rich men, and they capture all the attention. But then the story carries it throughout because, for example, some of the younger sisters of these Bennett sisters, that's the name of the family, Bennett. Some of these younger Bennett sisters also are captivated by when the officers come into town. And notice it's not the infantrymen that they're all excited about, it's the officers, because of course they have the higher status. And then one of the friends of the family eventually marries this Collins kind of character, and Elizabeth gets mad at her because she feels like she's settling. But this girl said, it's my status. He's got the kind of status that I need that can take care of me, that can give me the life that I want, and I have to settle because maybe I'm not the most attractive person and things like that. So this through and through, this story proves this point. And again, we can think that we've gotten beyond that, but if you look around in society, largely it it holds true, that still women tend to look across at their social level or higher. And even counterexamples of this in stories where you could say, no, Gary, look, there's these stories that women love where it's some rich girl who takes this liking in a poorer guy, right? And so take The Notebook and Titanic. These are two examples of other chick flicks that there's much to learn from. But in both of these, you have the high status female who becomes attracted to the lower status guy. But notice that whenever that's the case, there's always something else, right? You cannot find a story with an exception, at least I have not. And that's that this lower status guy is only lower status in one dimension, maybe money, and usually only like temporarily. The movies will take great pains whenever there's this dynamic to show you that this guy, even though he might have been, his family may be more lowly in his circumstance, is nonetheless very capable in other ways, right? They'll have some part of the movie that will show that this guy has charisma, has potential, has capability in other ways. And so The Notebook, for example, there's a whole sequence where the guy buys this estate and really changes it into something beautiful, whatnot, so that later in the story when they reunite, because at first it didn't work out because of their status largely, but later in the story it works out because he's shown his capability. So that also brings out another thing, that what women, yes, status, social status does matter. So at your social status level and higher, but what lies kind of beneath that, what the reason for that is ultimately to do with capability in men. And we've been over this before on this stream. So this isn't, I'm not pretending this is something new, but it remains something important, and something important to this story, right? And most stories that you'll ever see in romances. So no matter what, just notice that in whatever story women ever like and pay attention to and like the romance in it, the guy will always have this capacity in him, which kind of plays out in the same ways. It's got to be at least at her level or higher than her level in many dimensions, or else that guy's not an attractive guy. Okay, and so it's useful to ask yourself, why is that the case? And so the reason that's the case, I think, again, most of these reasons kind of go down to our fundamental levels of what makes us human, even down to our biology and the way that we experience the world. Women have way more to lose out of a relationship than men do if it doesn't go well, particularly when you bring children into the picture, right? But women just in so many dimensions have a lot to lose from a relationship if they get into the wrong one. And so what might underlying everything concern them, and that's that they're getting into this relationship and it will actually enhance their life, make it better, make their life easier rather than worse. So you can imagine if a woman marries a guy who is in essence less capable than her, then her life is going to get worse, because now she has one more thing in her life that she has to take care of and watch over and bolster up. If he's low status and low capability, then she's got to make up for that. And so again, that essentially probably makes her life worse. So you can understand why, especially when most women have an innate understanding that probably at some point in their life they're going to have children, and that in the nature, like we've talked about with children, they're very difficult to raise as humans. They take an extraordinarily long time, and the women, just by the nature of them being the source of the initial nutrients and having to bear the kids, are going to bear the brunt of that. So why also be saddled to a guy who's going to, if anything, just bring you down, make something that you have to take care of? Why would a woman do that? Most women aren't going to settle for that, so they're going to look for a guy who is at their level of capability or status or higher and can offer all sorts of benefits to them in their life. It makes perfect sense, right? Whereas a guy, because they don't have so many of those types of burdens as to their nature, if the relationship's bad for them, it's much easier. They can just exit out of it with a lot less hanging over them. So it's a different kind of dynamic with what a guy looks for, which tends to be, sorry to say, women, but it still tends to be, and I would say this hasn't changed much, even with our modern notions, but a guy will mostly look, or the first thing that they're going to look for is attractiveness. And that doesn't have to do with social status. So guys will look across the status and monetary spectrum in a girl and find a girl completely adequate on those regards, because even if you want to look at it in an evolutionary way, because they are so burdened by innately by the burdens of childbearing, they're going to of course look for a spouse that is attractive to bear children and whatnot. So that's kind of an evolutionary take, but you can give it at least a little more substantive take, in as much as I do think we've gone past just our biological evolution in terms of our culture, in terms of our religion, our values, and things like that. And so, a guy is going to look for, he's not so concerned to find somebody that's going to take care of him, at least a good guy. He's going to be looking for somebody that's attractive to him, but also someone who's a complement in the sense of motivates him, in a sense who helps him to be a better person, somebody who fills his gaps in the ways that he has gaps, can kind of make up for some of his weaknesses, or at least help him to change and hone his good attributes to be to their most productive use and whatnot. So it's a different dynamic that isn't so tied up with money and whatnot. So anyway, that is the first thing that I pull out of this movie, because it just is infused in the whole dynamic of what's going on. And again, I don't think that dynamic has changed much in society. Looks like a few more of you have jumped on. Osama, hello, and thank you for being on here. Martin, are you familiar with the red pill? We've brought this up before, and I know it's a movement. I know it's kind of a take, and I haven't dived in to really understand the movement still. Not because I kind of want to, but it's just, I have like this stack of books that I'm always trying to get to, all these other things that I'm trying to accomplish. So it just hasn't happened yet, not because I don't think it's important. So I don't know as much about it yet, Martin. But you say, the girl I've been dating told me yesterday that she's in love with me. Everything you say makes sense. So yeah, maybe this fits within that kind of dynamic. Okay, so that's the first point. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything from that one. I'm going to jump back just to kind of an overall look. We can stop looking at all those pictures. Okay, next one. Women are, I think, highly attracted to unfinished, let's say, rough around the edges men, that they, through their being a woman, their being a feminine, dazzling, captivating creature, and having that kind of dazzling, captivating nature, can hone this rough, unfinished character in a man to be something better, but do it for them. I think that is, as I look at stories, is one of the most attractive things to a woman, to think that there's this, unfinished, rough, but very capable, very promising force, right? A man, let's say. And that man will actually polish himself, hone himself, sometimes soften himself in ways that make him better, but for her. That's the key thing, right? That you'll see in these stories, that he'll do it for her. She is the driving force for him. Okay. And so this is very important, I think, if you, in dynamics of meeting women and being attractive to them. And so let's dive into this a little bit more. So, what I've noticed is it's the key component is that women want to see men change, but for them, not for other external purposes. I'm sure they're fine with that, but it's not as attractive. It's not as motivating for them. They want to see the man change because of their influence in the man's life. And so in this movie, at the first of the movie, like when Elizabeth hears that Darcy is not enough to tempt her, like she kind of overhears at this dance where Bingley is talking with Darcy, and it's some great lines, because he's like, there's plenty of beautiful girls here, Darcy, and what about those Bennet girls, and he says, yes, there's, they're barely tolerable, but not enough to tempt me. He's just kind of being arrogant right there, where in the end he actually was quite taken with them, right? But in that, Elizabeth overhears that, and that puts her into a tiff, right? Because she feels that she is not a force enough to actually move this guy in any way. And you could see how that would be, given this theory, utterly frustrating to to a woman. Whereas later in the story, as things develop, there's this point where Darcy has already proposed, he's admitted his love for Elizabeth, and she's totally rejected him. But after that, a sequence of events happens where they meet up again through the course of events, and Darcy is presented with an opportunity to really help out Elizabeth's family by solving a brouhaha that emerged because of her sister Lydia. And he takes these very magnanimous gestures, these very generous gestures to benefit the Bennet family. But it becomes highly, that's where you can see Elizabeth really open up her attractiveness to her attraction to Darcy, right? Is because she senses that all these things that he's doing, these magnanimous gestures, is all because of her, actually. And then later in the story, he says it explicitly, you have to realize it was all for you, right? And so that really clinches it as far as why I think women love this story, because it's not that Darcy would just become a better man, right? It's that he would become a better man for her because of her, the force that women can have on men. And so you'll notice that this is essentially the Beauty and the Beast story. In one of its many, many forms. And again, we've also mentioned this a lot on the streams, but it's just worth returning back to, because it in so many ways is kind of the fundamental romance, feminine romance archetype, is this Beauty and the Beast story. But a real important thing to notice, kind of a key part of that, is to notice that the guy has to be beastly in order for this to work. It doesn't work if the guy's just... You rarely see a story where a guy's just kind of shy and soft and non-capable, and that he's just a scrub. I don't know if I ever see if there's any stories where the complete I don't know how to say it, worthless guy, the complete unmotivated guy, then becomes some great guy because of her. I'm sure there's probably some version of that, but usually it's that there's a guy that underlying things has already some great attributes. They're just rough. They're not polished attributes, right? And so if it's a beastliness, it could be that he has great power, great strength. If it's the other version is the nerd, it's this guy that has great capacity, maybe intellectually or in his cleverness, or in his, there's different ways that the nerd can be presented, but it's this girl that causes him to kind of hone those things and put them to good use. You see this with monsters, with werewolves. There's the bad boy too. So he's kind of the guy that is the countercultural guy, the guy that's got something against society, that breaks the rules and things like that. But notice there's that capacity there, the guys that's willing to break the rules, that things like that. These are the characters that usually fit into the Beauty and the Beast story. It's not very often just some utterly worthless scrub that the girl kind of motivates and brings along like a little lamb that grows up to be a more capable thing. It doesn't usually work that way, right? So what that means is that if you want to live out this Beauty and the Beast archetype with a woman and be attractive to a woman in this way, you have to have let's just say this, another way of saying it is that before you can be a gentleman, which we see as kind of the ideal, you should strive to be a gentleman, you have to be a man first. Right? This is a John Wayne quote. There has to be something manly about you first. And this is also what's going on in this story, because Darcy, at the beginning of the story, he's brusque, he's condescending, he's the force that tries to not allow Jane and Bingley to be together. He's the one that seeks to separate them and whatnot. And by that, he looks kind of beastly, right? Not a good person or whatnot. But when you delve into the story, the reason he's doing all those things is because he is a man. And all these things are motivated by notions of duty, of loyalty to a friend, of loyalty to his estate, that for his honor and his sense of kind of embodying something honorable. Those are all the motivations behind it. Of course, he executes it in a rough and a little bit non-likable way, But that's where he's got those underlying attributes. So then Elizabeth steps in through the story, and she becomes the force that polishes those things, that hones them to their best use, so that by the end, Darcy has become this much more admirable guy because of Elizabeth, right? And so you see how that all works in this story. And again, applying it back to yourself, you've got to develop some of those attributes first. They don't have to be perfect and honed and things like that, but you have to have some form of beastliness or capability to you. You can't be some just passive, non-moving, sitting on a couch, sluggish type of person, or else this kind of Beauty and the Beast archetype just does not work out, right? Martin says, do you think that feminism destroys this Beauty and the Beast archetype, or at least makes this dynamic appalling to such women? I'm actually going to say something about that. So I'll trade that for later, but that's a very good, insightful thing to bring up, because how does this relate to feminism? Because feminism wouldn't seem to want this kind of guy, right? And so, we'll talk about that, and I think hopefully I have a somewhat insightful conclusion on that. But the next thing I wanted to bring out on this, before that, is that you also notice that a fairly likable story to women is kind of the Ugly Duckling change story, where you have also an unfinished woman in some way. And you'll notice that it's kind of the very same Beauty and the Beast story, but in a different dynamic, with a different, the feminine is more the beastly character in this one, and the masculine is more of the beauty, if you will, but done in a masculine way, in a feminine way. And that's where the kind of the ugly duckling story works out. So there's so many examples of this kind of story in ones that women love, like the story, Cinderella is essentially this. You got Princess Diaries, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, Sabrina, 16 Candles, Dirty Dancing. These are all where you kind of have this girl that's an awkward, unfinished, not as dazzling and captivating woman as she could be, and because of some more polished, guy character, she changes over time to become more capable, dazzling, as to her femininity and her feminine traits, right? So it's the very same thing. And I think what makes Pride and Prejudice a good story is that it has the Beauty and the Beast story, but it also has the Ugly Duckling story. In as much as, Elizabeth is she has these really good feminine attributes. She is feminine. She's got kind of that feminine bite, which you could say is kind of masculine, but there's a way in which women can have that kind of feminine bite or energy, a little bit of hostility, towards them. And through the course of the story, she also softens. That's where in Pride and Prejudice, you kind of have to say, well, who's the prejudiced one? Who's the proud one? You could apply that moniker to both of them at different times. And through the course of the story, they both hone themselves, become better people. And so that's essentially the reason why this story, I think, becomes a beloved story, is because both characters in the course of it hone themselves, soften themselves because of the other, right? And that's where you also can pull out this really practical, valuable insight that when you're exploring a relationship with somebody, this should be the sought for dynamic, where both of you, this is kind of how, this is one of those magical things in the universe, like this is how markets work and things like that. Both of you come into the relationship and perceive that you are actually getting the better deal out of it, that you are kind of getting value from that other person and becoming a better person. But the crazy thing is that that happens to both of you at the same time. So there's this kind of net creation of value between you. You both become better people, and you wonder, well, where did all the, it would seem to be by the laws of thermodynamics, that couldn't happen. But this is one of those, again, magical things about the universe, is that you can have these situations through exchange, through unfinished guys and gals coming together that fill each other's gaps, as Rocky's saying, making it so that both of them feel like the other is moving them and inspiring them to be a better person. So that's the primary thing. I've said it before, I would look for in a relationship is that on an ongoing basis, you and the other are both feeling like you are being motivated to be better people, and you in fact are better people from being together. Because if it's only one of you is experiencing that, it won't work. And of course, if both of you are becoming worse people because of the relationship, well, that's obvious that it's not meant to be. And so I would exit that kind of thing rather quickly and look for a different possibility. So anyway, that's worth bringing up. All right. Lastly, here's my last point on this, and this will eventually get to what Martin just brought up, and that I think that even I guess I'll just put it this way. It's not a perfect way of describing it, but even masculine women want to be feminine. And so we've covered a lot in this channel about how inside of all of us we have the masculine and the feminine, and that predominantly most men want to have the masculine foregrounded in their character and the feminine backgrounded, and vice versa. Most women tend to want the feminine foregrounded in their character, the masculine backgrounded. But nonetheless, you'll find a fair amount of women that have an aggression, right, a bite, a hostility kind of foregrounded in their character that sometimes can feel somewhat masculine, somewhat aggressive. Right. And today, if anything, women have been encouraged to have more of that kind of, again, more that kind of bite and aggression and kind of masculine energy to them. And then women more than ever today are also encouraged that femininity just means being more masculine, right? Striving for masculine position, striving for a masculine attitude to the world, being warriors. We see this, of course, in the movies. We've been over this many times. And so, again, on the one hand, I say, well, yeah, of course, that there's truth to that, because women can be masculine if they want to. We all have this capability. Men can be feminine. That is within our realm of possibility as human beings. We are very adaptable. That's what makes us who we are, and so these are possibilities. However, as I look at the way this movement has played out and encourage women to put that aggression more out there, my sense is that most women, again, I can't speak for all women or all particular circumstances, most women, even if they have masculine attributes to them, also want to be feminine to some other masculine. You could even say men have this too, right? Men recoil from many kind of manly men recoil from the thought of being feminine, but when it comes to it, we all have to act out femininity, a passiveness, right? And an acceptance of a higher capability, something higher than us. We all act that out in our lives. Like, take the military, one of the most manly places, whether it's the Marines or the Navy SEALs, and notice that there is just as much as there is a masculinity and power in those organizations, there's also inherently has to be a feminine principle too, of submissiveness, right? There can only be so many, both in terms of order or in terms of capability, there can only be so many people higher up on the hierarchy, right? And so what do the other people have to do? They have to submit to both order in terms of rank, things, and so things happen in an ordered way. And they have to submit to the system and whatnot. They have to submit to the higher value of the group rather than themselves. That's all submission. That's all feminine in a way. They also have to submit to capability. And if somebody is more capable than them, they have to submit to that and realize that there is an advancement in a person. They want the more capable person operating higher up on certain given hierarchies, and they have to submit to that in order for the group to proceed. And so, yeah, even men have to manifest femininity within religion. This is another place where you see that, where in your relationship to God, the higher principle, the principle that's higher than you submit to that. You are the feminine to God being the masculine. So there's nothing wrong with submission. There's nothing wrong with femininity. That's one of the things we have to get back into the world, is that there's nothing wrong We have things tied up, value judgments tied up with things like lower or submissive. We see those now as kind of pejorative terms where they're not. Like that is a part of the world that has to exist. And in as much as most women, I think, want to have femininity foregrounded in them, that means that there's, even if they do have masculine attributes, there's a desire to have those masculine attributes be feminized in a sense, okay? And so this is a story where I think you can actually see that kind of thing happen. You have Elizabeth Bennet, who again has this bite, who has this aggressiveness, who very much is kind of a modern woman in the way that the women are taught to be, who's not going to settle and who's not going to take crap from a man and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you see her having these moments of desire for something, again, above her, to submit to, in a way, right? And one of the most powerful scenes of this movie is in the moment where Darcy professes his love to her. So in that moment, he's also kind of opening himself up in, let's say, a feminine way. He's being submissive to his love, this higher principle of love for Elizabeth. But because he's kind of behaved in rude ways, she rejects him and really lays it on him at that moment. It's one of the best moment of of most of any version of these movies. I especially like this one that's here in the thumbnail, the more recent one with Keira Knightley. And so she really lays it on him and chastises him for even thinking that she would love him when he's been so nasty to her and her family. But the way that they play it is that right in that very moment where she's being the most aggressive and nasty and whatnot to him, there's this sense in which you can just see that there's also this longing for him to just lay one on her, right? And just like kiss her right there and take her, if you will. Again, this being today, never in a way that is taking away somebody's agency, that is forceful or by force. Of course, there is a distinction between rape and something like ravishing or whatnot. But that's where this fine distinction comes in, is this desire that I think comes from even that most women want to be feminized, right? And that comes from having some, even as much masculine as they might have an attribute, having something even more masculine than that feminize that attribute, if that makes sense. All right. And so there is a submission to that. And again, this might sound controversial, but I hope you kind of get the nuance of what I was saying, because again, I'm not at all advocating guys to go and be forceful to women or to, of course, rape is utterly abhorrent and bad and whatnot. But, being married and interacting with women all my life, there's these times where you realize that a woman, when oftentimes she's being her most most bitchy, for the lack of a better word, irrational, angry, things like that, is most wanting right there something like a man to come and take her and love her, right? So there's this sense that, like, a married man probably noticed this, if you're really paying attention, that sometimes when your wife is the most irrational, most again, full of anger or just being unreasonable, and is maybe most mad with you, that the best thing you could do in that moment is to, like, this is going to sound crazy, but like, look at your wife and just be like, man, you're so sexy when you're mad, and you know what, I love you, and I'm never going to change. That's never going to change. And then, like, take her and press her up against a wall and lay one on her or more, right? You have to know that is something that most women would love at that moment, right? And you could say, well, I mean, outside of marriage, it's a very dangerous proposition, because if you get that wrong, if you judge that situation wrong, boom, you could have, the guys with guns in their holsters knocking on your door the next thing you know it. And that's the danger in this, which is why, marriage makes sense in a lot of ways. But what I'm trying to say here, I hope you realize this, is that, again, I think most women, given that they do want to be feminine predominantly in their character, the only way that it can happen, if they happen to be more kind of masculine women, which is fine, or have these attributes, is that at certain points men have to be even more masculine than them, to feminize them, right? To bring about that submission, which is not a bad thing. Again, I've just said submission, even in men, is not a bad thing. That feminine attribute. Okay, and so so we see that very much in this movie. Again, it's kind of a good thing that it doesn't happen like that in the moment that Darcy professes his love, because it is the case that he's been very rude and kind of nasty to her family. So he doesn't deserve to be able to do that to her at that moment. But in a sense, by being more manly than her through the rest of the movie and the way that he acts, you can see that softens her, that makes it so that finally she is open to him, having thoroughly kind of been more masculine than her in that moment where he's magnanimous to her family and gracious and he accomplishes it through a different way. And that's probably something interesting to see, so that finally at the end of the movie, she has completely, melted that part of her. And then they become this very natural complementary pair. So it works. And I think that's what people sense in this movie. Again, that's part of the transformation that each of them have in this. So it's something very powerful to behold, right? And so, again, bring it back into regular life. This is a bit the nature of women, that women are more emotional. They are more dramatic at times. And sometimes that can get out of control. It can sometimes even run in cycles. It is, I claim, a very real thing, in as much as women are more cyclical, because feminine is more cyclical. We've been talking about cyclical time, cycles within history, things like that. Well, women have natural cycles to them in ways that men don't. And yes, I'm talking about the ovulation period. And women do change hormonally and things like that. I'm not saying all women or all women in the same way, but at least many women that I've noticed do change through that cycle, such that there is a period, and it makes perfect sense in a symbolic way, that they would reach a period in that cycle where there's a period of an end of a world, essentially, which what happens, like in our day, at the end of a world, irrationality comes in, a little bit more chaos, a little bit more swirling, emotion and things like that. And in those moments, the worst kind of thing that they can do is be rejected at that moment. But, and I've had to learn this the hard way many times through going through many iterations of this. You have to learn how to channel, that energy, move it in a more positive direction as a man. That's what you do as a man, right? You channel things. You exert your manly power in a way to move the world in the way that it's most productive into. Again, you don't try to stop, you don't try to dam that power, you try to channel it in its most productive things. I hope this is making sense, and I hope I'm not going to have, feminist people coming and reading this all the wrong way in what I'm trying to say here. But this is something that I've experienced in my life, and it's something very real to realize about women. It even happens in a dad-daughter relationship. That's the other way that it can happen. In our family, it tends to be, this can happen to the guys too, but it tends to be more my daughters than my sons it's at times get so swirled up in a dramatic, overly dramatic, to the point of irrationality kind of exuberance, where they're being a drama queen in a sense, and in a way that crosses lines, right? And it is a father that has to come in a moment and say essentially, enough with this. Or, hopefully you can do the same thing, find some way to give that girl a hug, maybe hug her and say, enough of this, right? Be done with this kind of thing, and make sure that it knows that there's a certain point where which that kind of drama and feminine exuberance, which has its place, right? There's a place of renewing and stuff that comes with that, can be channeled away into something better rather than just work a destructive power in life. So yeah, this is a tough one to talk about because I don't think I have exactly the right concepts to talk about it yet. So I'm going to have to rely on you being deferential to me, trying to put the right, hopefully my spirit about this is right, even if my articulation of it isn't quite where I want it to be yet. But in this story, you see that kind of thing in Elizabeth Bennet, and you see the way that through a greater masculinity than her masculine, she is softened and made feminine in a way that's very satisfying, I think, to everyone, both men and women, by the end of the movie. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about this movie. I see there's some good comments that have come in, so let's take a look at some of the rest of those and see if you can help me unpack, especially this last point, which is a little more difficult to make. Let me just make sure I didn't leave out any point that I wanted to on that, though. Oh, yes, so now let's get back to Martin's thing. So, Martin, here's something that I think hopefully will make some more sense now. So, one of my senses is that if you'll notice, as much as we've been talking about this fourth turning and the way that societies go through these cycles and whatnot, and notice something that right there at the beginning period of a cycle where there has just been a very masculine force, usually that has dealt with a big crisis in society. So World War II is the perfect example. The men all went off and in a very masculine way dealt with this crisis, and they come back. And in that period, right there post-war, is where I think you notice feminism being at its weakest. And then in the next period after that is where it really kind of awakens to a new fervor of feminism that only grows from that point on. But also notice right there where men are being their most masculine and living out manhood in the ways that we've talked about, where they most created value for society in a noble masculine way, feminism, I think, is at its quietest and weakest. And you also see women being happiest to be more feminine, right? But my claim is as that period passes and men oftentimes become more feminine, and we won't, right when the more you see men being more feminine or more, you could say toxic masculine, where if they do show masculinity, it's not real manhood. It's not a masculinity that's directed at serving society and making things better for men, women, and children, but rather self-serving to men. And when you don't see that kind of manhood in society, then you see feminism appear and grow. And so my claim would be that the greatest way for, to kind of, I don't want to say quiet, but calm a fervor of feminism would be for men to be the most nobly masculine and live out noble manhood as possible. Okay. And that's kind of counter to what a lot of people would think, that if there's this fervor of feminism, it means men need to be softer, men need to be more understanding and show their more feminine side and be more emotional and things like that. I think it's the exact opposite. Not to say a man can't be emotional, but it's that men need to be more manly in the most noble way that of manliness, that we've done 5 or 6 episodes on what that means, which is focused on creating real public tangible values for society at large, including women, predominantly women, if anything. Just like you see in a time like World War II, that's when feminism in the way that we've experienced, despite its multiple waves, I think calms down. I'm not saying women, the basic underlying notion of feminism that women should be, paid the same for the same work, and that women should have equal worth and respect to them. Of course, I agree with all that. There should always be an ongoing project, always. But it's these other notions of women needing to be more masculine or not feeling satisfied or being angry at men, and all that side of it, I think, is calmed by men being their most nobly masculine. They're embodying manhood to the best ways. That's when that calms down. So I hope that makes sense in what we were just talking about as well, and how that's counterintuitive to the way that society would explain what is to be done for women at the times that women are being the most feminist, as it were. Okay, let's dive back into your comments. So Martin, to kind of directly address your problem now, do you think that feminism destroys this beauty in the beast archetype, or at least makes this dynamic appalling to such women? I mean, in the words it does, but I think, again, so returning back to this, I think that the greatest way, if feminism is claiming that, the greater thing that men need to do is be more beastly. But again, it's that noble beastly. You have to see there's that distinction. It's not the toxic beastly, it's the noble beastly that then women, when you're that more noble masculine to the women, that allows women to be more feminine. You see how that works? Just as we were saying with Elizabeth Bennet. And so that's what I think brings back, that women by and large do still want to be the Beauty and the Beast story. But in order to do that, they have to have the noble beast there so that they can be the beauty. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Okay, Raphael, looks like you join us, so nice to have you here. Christian, the BBC Pride and Prejudice with Colin Firth is better, dude. I like them both. I mean, they're good. I appreciate both their things, but I do think there's certain moments in it, Christian, that I think are better done in the newer one. Again, like that moment where he professes his love. I think there's a better overall chemistry kind of between Keira Knightley and I forget his name in this one. And so again, I've seen them both. I find great value, and I don't argue like one's bad or one's good. I just find there's certain moments that each one does better. I really like the filming, the beauty of the cinematography and whatnot of the newer one. I also think is better. The music is better in the newer one. But yeah, the other one is more extensive in that it plays out more. There's more kind of nuances in some of the acting and whatnot. And so I think they're both good in their different ways. But so I'm not even going to say like better or worse. I just find that certain parts of each of them are better. Kennedy, the St. Augustine. A lot of female want some more masculine than them. Is this show that the men can't be to show that the men can't be pushed around? Yeah, I think in general, women want men to be more masculine than them. Of course, it's very complicated. You can't just do broad strokes with anything in humanity. And so there is ways in which, men sometimes will have more feminine attributes that fit really well with women that might have more masculine, and then you kind of fill each other's gaps. That's good. But when it comes down to, this overall, if a woman is fairly a masculine woman, I think there's only two options for her to make a relationship work. She either needs to find a man that is feminine to her masculine in that ways, and you see that like a lot of women settle for that. You'll find, and I don't think it's beautiful to see that kind of pairing. It works, it creates a peace for them, and I can't speak for them whether they both enjoy it, but I don't, to see a woman kind of feminize a man, I don't think is noble and beautiful. Whereas even with your most masculine woman, whether that masculinity is in a physical masculinity, or that masculinity is in more the way that she engages with the world or her intellect or things like that, I think the more beautiful thing is to see her find somebody that's so much more masculine than her that she is feminized by it. I think that is the more beautiful complementary relationship by and large. And I kind of, I look at those men who are kind of the feminine to their wife overall, and man, it's just my perspective, but I feel bad for those guys because there's certain things those women will never experience, right? From of having that masculine, to again submit to in different ways, but submit in a good. I don't see submission as a bad thing, and I submit to all sorts of things, right? So as in a feminine way, right? So anyway, that's where I think that it's generally on the whole more beautiful to see that. But of course, I'm not going to speak to everyone's particulars because everybody has particular circumstances that you can only identify in the particular. Okay, Christian says, good job for explaining something so difficult to discuss openly, open to misinterpretation. It's definitely something guys get subconsciously. I had to figure it out consciously. Yeah, it's the way it plays out. And that's where, it's such a fraught thing, because you can see how some college guy kind of senses this intuitively. And that's where, you get these appalling kind of things where, frat house guys will be saying like, no means, shouting something like no means yes, and yes means anal or something like that. I mean, as appalling as that kind of phrase is because they get, in a sense, something of this dynamic. But I said it's utterly fraught, because like, here's the thing that I think underlies this whole thing about rape in our rape culture, in our culture, is that, the person, essentially the way that sex works in all these interactions is that the person that decides whether rape occurred or not, that should have the most standing, usually is the woman. I'm not saying it can't occur to the man, but it happens after the fact, right? There's nothing that's like you can't have some, cameras watching everybody at every time to determine exactly what happens. It comes from a feeling afterwards. And so if guys, especially outside of something like marriage, where there already is a trust and expectation and working relationship with people, engage in something like going for it when a woman says no or something like that, well, again, you are playing with utter fire, because here's the determining factor: if she likes it, then there will be no claims of rape. If she doesn't, it ends up she doesn't like that experience, and guess what? She could claim rape. And maybe she could even like it that day, and then a week later not like it because your relationship went bad, and then she could claim something otherwise. See, that's where all this complexity about rape and stuff comes in, where from my perspective, I said I would rather avoid that altogether by, only entering into a sexual relationship when there's already a grander structure around it of trust, of deference to each other and whatnot, where, so this kind of thing works so much better within, in my opinion, within something like a marriage, where there's bounds, there's an understanding, there's norms as to what you're kind of allowed, and the deference in a sexual relationship to play with something like that of, when your wife's mad, pushing her against the wall and kissing her and making sweet love to her, or however you want to put it out there. I mean, like, it's so much easier to play with that kind of dynamic and then work with it if it goes well or not within a marriage than if you're on some college campus with people that have just met each other. I mean, that's so foolish. It's so playing with fire as to the complexity, which is why, we think we can have all this freedom from just this sexual liberation, that it's all without consequences, and just we eliminate the child part of it, and so everything else is just wonderful and work itself out. And it's fraught. It is utterly fraught. Sex is with all these kinds of nuanced little distinctions and the way that people understand things and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, we have gained the world when you see all this stuff, like all this debate swirling on campus, rape culture, and try to figure it out, and these panels that exist at universities, the kind of inquisitorial panels and things like that. That is all, we asked for that. We are getting what we deserve because of the way that we thought that sex could be so cheap and easy and simple. So anyway, there's my little rant on that, right? All right, Christian also said, there's a real lesson to learn for guys like me that conversations have subtext, and you don't always do best by taking women literally all the time. I'm a super verbal communicator, so it's a skill. Yeah, I've had to learn that too. I mean, I want conversation to be precise. I want words to have precise meanings. I remember back in high school, I told Sarah at a certain time where I felt like there was kind of a game, kind of an unseen game going on, underneath our relationship and the involvement of other people out there. I kind of said, like, I don't want that. I want us to be open and talk about it and be clear about things. And to an extent, it's okay to ask for that in a relationship, right? But to another degree, we're human, and so much we cannot capture within words, or ever get the precision within our words to ever be as precise as we, Christian and I even would want it to be. And so you have to also be sensitive to this thing that underlying words, there's actions, there's context, there's environment, there's other people, the way people were raised coloring into a relationship, there's your underlying culture, there's all these different levels of dynamics that are going into communication and what's actually being communicated. And sometimes people can't say what they actually mean. Sometimes they don't even know what they actually want. And so they say one thing and it's not what they want. I mean, there's all those dynamics that make it so complicated. And in the end, you have to run on trying to communicate through words, but also being sensitive to trying to feel things out underneath what's really going on, underneath and inside of people, rather than just what's coming out of their mouth, right? So it's definitely a skill, and I am not an expert at it. And, really in all the institutions I have more control over, like our family, I try to move things more to, guys, let's get this out and talk about it as much as we can and get people comfortable with that. Because I do think there's a great value to being able to work on things at the level of an open, articulated level, so that you can not have so much uncertainty swirling around underneath everything. But there's always going to be a certain amount of that. Christian also says, this would definitely be a great video essay. How is the Interstellar essay going? Do we need to threaten to unsubscribe to help you? Yeah, so what's going on with that is like, I'm kind of sitting on it because, so I'm done. It's got clips all to it. I'm working on the music part of it. So it's like, it's virtually done. Like if I wanted to, I could put it out today. But it's the fact that I've thought about it for so long and I want it to be so good. I need the chance to just kind of slowly go through it and make sure everything is said the way I want it to. All the clips are the way I want it to. The music works good. And because I've got another video going on this week that I have to get done by the end of the week because it's actually for essentially a client. And I'm going to do two versions of it. One that I just give to the client, and another one which I maybe make a little bit longer and then just release on my channel. It's going to be about change. I'm trying to work in Walter Mitty to it, maybe the movie The Way. So that's where, like Interstellar, I'm just not trying to force it. At the same time, I'm getting this other one done and have a deadline for it. So yeah, I probably should have never even brought up that I was working on Interstellar, but of course, sometimes that's my only way to get me moving on it. So I'm sorry. I'm always putting out these complicated back and forth things with all these nuances, and yeah, sometimes I need to not commit on something like Interstellar. But long and short of it is, it's almost done. I mean, it's virtually done, but I'm just kind of sitting on it to make sure I like it. And it's 50 minutes long, so I have to kind of be able to go through and really decide, yes, I'm satisfied with this. It's ready to go, and I haven't completed that kind of process yet. So Christian, you said, also Martin, congrats on the Girlman. Yeah. So that's all, in any sense, that's an accomplishment. And Martin says, thanks, Christian. Gary's channel has contributed a lot to my growth and maturity. I think has led to my success. So I'm glad to see, again, whenever I hear that this actually has some actual tangible influence in the world, it makes it all worth it. All right. Kennedy, the Saint Augustine, says, what is the difference, the noble masculine and toxic masculine? Please explain, because I was taught to be more feminine. I'd say the biggest difference between noble masculinity and toxic masculinity is the fact that noble masculinity benefits everybody else, right? Whereas toxic masculinity usually only serves the guy. I could say man, but of course he wouldn't be a man if he was toxic masculine. He'd just be a guy, a male. And so because you can go back, I think if you want to, go back and find in the very beginning of these live streams, I did this whole series on what is manhood. And what comes out is that we tried to develop a definition. And the definition that finally came out of there is that the essence of manhood is turning essentially manly energies to the benefit of society. And that's why society is the entity that gives the designation of manhood. You cannot designate yourself a man. It can only be done within a group. So, a group could designate you a man. Like if you're a Marine, your fellow Marines could designate you a man. If you're in a community, your community could designate you a man. And those two might disagree, right? But at least you're a man within some group. But it's the group, the society, that determines whether you're a man or not. And that will totally hinge on whether you produce more good and value for the society rather than just for yourself. And so when you look at all the claims of what toxic masculinity is, you'll see that the defining feature is that it usually hurts other people and benefits just the guy. Whether it's the way that he's carrying out, sexual relationships, whether it's the way that he's a bully in different ways, or aggressive and puts people down, or acts towards people in the world in a way that he thinks is masculine but is really just hurting other people. Whereas you look at somebody who is nobly masculine, let's take somebody easy like Jocko Willink, who people look at and they say, wow, he seems really masculine and really noble. Well, why is that? Because one, he was a Navy SEAL and a good one, and so that inherently benefited society. Two, he's now doing these podcasts and businesses and stuff that are offering value to the world, and so he's both masculine, but he's not toxic masculine. He's more manly masculine, because everything that he's doing is helping, benefiting other people rather than tearing them down. So that's really the crucial distinction, I think. Martin, it's called shit test. What is your stance on it? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Martin. If you could say just a little bit more here before we end. I'm not sure what you mean. Maybe what you mean, the distinction between the two of them. Maybe that's just a way of saying what I just said. But anyway, so I think this was a good discussion today. I'm glad that, once again, you guys found lots of things to participate, to talk about. So I am just about to wrap up here. What you can expect from the rest of this week is, I'm not sure on the live streams, but yeah, I'm very much working on 2 videos, trying to finish up Interstellar, and also trying to finish up this other video on change, which has been really useful. I did a live stream on it last week, but kind of really looking into how is it that we get ourselves to change positively, doing things that we're not yet doing, or being something that we're not yet being, or stopping the kind of behaviors that we want to stop. So anyway, that is what I'm working on. So I'm going to get to that today and let you guys all go. And I'm sure you have all productive, good things to be working on today as well. At least I hope I do. And that you have another, a great rest of this day. So this is Gary signing off from Mission Top once again. And I hope you have a great day, each of you. Thank you. Goodbye.